What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be breaking down strong evidence in both the My Hero Academia manga and the Vigilante spin-off that proves the origin of Principal Nezu has a direct connection to All For One. While it's true that in the series so far, Nezu's past has been mostly a mystery, one thing we've always known is that he was the victim of several experiments at the hands of humans. And so when you combine that information with the other clues we'll be talking about, you start to realize there's no way this guy is as squeaky clean as he tries to appear. There are very few times I've ever been as certain about a theory as I am with this, so stick around till the end and I guarantee you'll see how the manga is telling us that the villains and the principal have a history together. Before we get into it, don't forget to smash that sub button if you haven't already, and remember there will be spoilers ahead. Okay, so to explain the true origin of Nezu, we first need to go back to chapter 270, in which Dr Garaki revealed some very relevant information. In this chapter, the Doctor said that 70 years ago, it was him who came up with the idea of the quirk singularity theory, which is of course the idea that quirks will become so complex that regular humans won't be able to control their power. After presenting this hypothesis, he was rejected by other scientists who said that it was nonsense based on weak evidence, and Garaki's life then completely fell apart after that, with him being excluded from the scientific community and becoming homeless. Despite this, it was All For One who helped the Doctor to turn his life around, and he gave him resources that enabled him to begin his twisted experiments, and All For One did this because unlike everyone else, he believed in Dr. Garaki's theory. As I said, the quirk singularity concept was heavily criticized due to lack of evidence, so it stands to reason that once he had the backing of All For One, the Doctor would conduct research to find evidence that would support his belief. In order for him to prove that quirks would one day become too complex to handle, it first required a fundamental understanding of what a quirk actually is, and this brings us to the topic of mice. In chapter 158, we were introduced to the notion that quirks might be a disease that mice help to spread across the world, and to this day that is the only explanation we've ever gotten as to how these abilities suddenly started appearing. Kai Chisaki was a strong believer in the mouse theory, and in a flashback he was seen conducting his own experiments on mice while he was researching the nature of Eri's power. Later on in the series, Horikoshi dropped yet another clue about mice when he decided to make them the symbol of the Meta Liberation Army, who were a group dedicated to allowing people to freely use their quirks. What this shows is that in the world of My Hero Academia, the idea that mice are responsible for the origin of quirks is being heavily pushed by the author himself, and currently there is no other alternate explanation. Bearing that in mind, it's guaranteed that at some point in the past, Dr. Garaki would have experimented on mice to deepen his understanding of what quirks actually are, and in Japan, the word for mouse is Nezumi. The word Nezumi is where the name Nezu derives from, heavily implying that even though his current appearance is like a mixture of lots of different animals, at his core he is or was just a mouse. This is where things begin to tie together, because number one, we've established the importance of mice and why Dr. Garaki would want to experiment on them, and number two, we've established that Nezu is a type of mouse who has been experimented on. We're now going to dive into the outcome of Nezu's experiments, and how My Hero Academia Vigilantes implies he might be the UA Traitor. To start things off, back in the day, All For One was understandably the only person able to transfer quirks, but in the present day, Dr. Garaki has such a deep understanding that he can transfer quirks, duplicate them, or even store them on chips purely using technology alone. That kind of knowledge is so far more advanced than anyone else in this series, but it was only possible thanks to his unethical experiments, the first of which would likely have been conducted on mice. Besides them being important to the origin of quirks, they are very often used as lab rats to test things out, and I believe Dr. Garaki would have followed that same process. I say that because even though the guy is a mad scientist, he has been shown to follow some basic principles, like for example the time when he searched for a willing test subject to have their bodies enhanced to receive All For One. For that reason, I'm sure that decades ago, as a test, there would have come a time when Garaki wanted to enhance the body of a mouse to receive a quirk, and that regular mouse eventually became Principal Nezu. I'll preface this by saying that on Nezu's character page, his age is listed as unknown, meaning the idea of him being old enough to be one of the Doctor's original creations is very possible within this timeline. Furthermore, while there are several humans that have animalistic quirks, there are only a handful of animals that possess quirks themselves, and every single one of them has questionable origins. In the Vigilantes prequel, All For One was the mastermind behind a group known as the Villain Factory, who conducted really gross experiments on both humans and animals in the hope of one day creating a Nomu that could defeat All Might. Overall, there were a few creatures that the Villain Factory modified in the series, including an elephant and a panda that were found in their lab, a monster cat that was given 2 doses of the quirk-enhancing drug Trigger, and an army of sentient bees that were controlled by a queen bee who herself was able to inhabit a human host. This means that when we look at every single enhanced animal, literally all of them are confirmed to have some connection to All For One, except for Nezu at the moment, but in my opinion it's only a matter of time until his backstory is revealed to be similar. In a second, we'll get into how this means he could be the UA Traitor, but first, if you have any doubts about this theory, one question we should ask ourselves is if the principal was experimented on in all sorts of ways in the past, what exactly were the results of those experiments? In chapter 66, it was stated that there is no animal on the planet who is like Nezu, and rather than him being a freak occurrence, is it not more plausible that the experiments he went through are exactly the reason why he is so special? His body is unlike any other creature, as it seems to be a combination of a mouse, a dog, and a bear like he joked about in season 1, and his quirk enabled him to reach a high position in society and get close to All Might, something Dr Garaki's other creations never would have been able to do. It's specifically because of his intelligence that the villains could let him go off into the world and do his own thing, and in the process, Nezu became a millionaire who was in charge of the world's most famous hero school, giving All For One a mole on the inside of hero society. The principal even said himself that he has no way of clearly proving that he isn't the UA Traitor, so let's examine how he's been working for AFO this whole time. At the USJ, Kurogiri mentioned how they were able to plan the attack thanks to receiving a UA staff schedule, something the head of the school would of course have access to. That being said, Nezu's actions around this time weren't actually that suspicious, as he sat down and drank tea with All Might instead of encouraging the hero to go to the USJ where the Nomu was waiting to kill him. This opens up the possibility that, similar to Gigantomachia and Shirakumo, his mind has been, manipulated in a way where he has some degree of free will, but when he's called upon by All For One, he has no choice but to do what his master says. In that way, Nezu could essentially be leading two separate lives, one where he is genuinely on the side of the heroes and wants them to win, and another where he follows the orders that are given to him, courtesy of Dr Garaki's experiments. If this is the case, it would explain why Nezu thinks heroic thoughts even when he's alone, because his true nature is that of a hero. It's just that when he's called upon, he can't resist All For One. Anyway, the second time the UA Traitor made a move was when the villains received the location of a top secret forest training camp, which is a place where only the teachers and the wild pussycats were aware of. Again, this is a scenario where Nezu had access to information that the League of Villains wanted, and as a direct result of the attack, the students were moved into dorms, something the principal said he wanted to happen for a very long time. What makes this more suspicious is that once the kids were in dorms, the principal then paid out of his own pocket to redesign the UA barrier in such a way that it would be able to counter Shigaraki's awakened decay quirk. The problem here is that at the time when he made this large personal investment, the decay quirk hadn't awakened, and there was no existing evidence that such a thing would ever happen. He claimed he just relied on intuition when he did this, and given that he's super intelligent, you could make that argument. However, the fact he spent hundreds of millions of yen out of his own pocket, that shows that this was more than simple intuition, it was more than just a hunch. To do all this, Nezu had to have been certain that Shigaraki's decay was going to awaken before it happened, and on top of that, he knew exactly what an awakened form of this power would look like. In my opinion, the reason he was so sure of these things and why he was willing to spend all this money is due to the fact that as a creation of the villains, he had already seen the full potential of decay in the past on at least one occasion. Tomura's backstory proved that Decay was always able to transfer from one object to another. It's just that for most of his life, he subconsciously limited its potential, but anyone who knew Shigaraki as a child would know what the awakened Decay could do. Additionally, if you believe the theory that Decay was given to Shigaraki by All For One, which I happen to believe, then that means someone else in the past also had this same power, which is another reason why Nezu would be aware of its full potential. As the principal, he then did everything he could to counter against this threat, but if he is truly a puppet of the villains like Kurogiri, then everything he's done might play into All For One's hands. For example, we know that the UA barrier allows the school to be separated into individual parts, which are then sent underground, meaning that if the villains break in, Nezu could be ordered to trap Midori and Shigaraki in the same section of UA, and then have that section sent underground where there would be no escape. Anyhow, to recap the whole theory, mice seemingly have a strong connection to the origin of quirks, and would definitely have been studied by Dr Garaki while he was researching for evidence to support his singularity theory. As Garaki's understanding of quirks increased, he would have begun conducting experiments that laid the foundations for the things he does today, such as transferring and duplicating these abilities. In the case of Nezu, he was already confirmed to have gone through horrific experiments in his past, so when we consider the relevance of mice, and the fact that every other quirk-having animal has a connection to the villains, Nezu was likely made by the Doctor. These experiments turned him from a normal mouse into a super intelligent hybrid animal that was able to integrate into hero society and become a secret weapon for the villains. At the command of All For One, the principal handed over information that allowed his students to be attacked on different occasions, but presumably he had no choice because his programming is probably similar to that of Gigantomachia or Kurogiri. On the other side though, Nezu has a degree of free will, and for the most part he is a person who wants to do good, explaining why he wanted All Might to win during the Battle of Camino, and why he redesigned the UA barrier to counter against the power of awakened decay. With all that said, let me know what you think about this theory in the comments down below, and as always, hit that sub button if you want to see more stuff like this. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next one, peace out.